OBS is doing its thing. It's going well by the looks of things, all green bars. And so is YouTube, all green bars. Welcome everybody, I'm Michael. Today I'm joined by Josh Walrath. Yes, I'm pointing the right direction because for some reason it's in mirror image. But today we'll be talking some CPU tech mostly, because I'm somewhat of a novice and you're not. And
I don't know about that. I'm definitely an amateur. There are certainly professionals out there, and I don't have the depth of knowledge of some of these guys like David Cantor and others throughout the industry, but I try.
I still believe you're selling yourself short, but that's very humble of you. Anyway, if anybody's interested where to normally find you, they can go to PC Perspective on YouTube, very own YouTube here. So I always find it very interesting, and I like the deep dives. And then you have a merch store,
We do.
.com.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure where that came from. I think that I threatened to leave PCPer and make my own tech channel with blackjack and hookers, and I'm going to spell it Josh Tech with 2 Ks. So that was, I believe, where that came from.
I still like the mug the best probably, and the print though.
Yeah. It's I wonder how many of those have ever gone out. Probably not many, but it's amusing, and yeah, I use the mug all the time.
And you always obviously have the PC Perspective website, which is probably the best way to keep up with everything. I mean, I've seen so much coming in about Nvidia today. It's very exciting, really. I mean, they seem to be on a roll again.
They've never really gotten off the roll. It's kind of funny. I mean, their last really bad architecture was the FX series, and while they were a little behind when the GTX 780, 790 series came out, they were still very much in performance. I guess the GTX 480 was not, their greatest product, but they rebounded with the 580, and then from there on, they've just been knocking it out of the park. I mean, they've been keeping AMD on their toes, and right now they're just kind of head and shoulders above that other company in terms of power, performance. But they're commanding a better price, and certainly when you look at their quarterly earnings, their margins are outstanding as compared to AMD.
Yeah. And last thing, you can find you on the Twitter universe. I mean, I always sometimes feel like if you want to watch the world burn down on a daily basis, Twitter's the place.
Yes, it's where people go to yell at each other. So,
yeah. Anyway, good times though, because it is easier to connect, I feel, to a lot of people. I mean, after all, that's how I think I first wrote to you.
Yep.
So yeah, exciting times to come. I'm actually loving AMD like never before in the last month or so again, especially with the new and improved X399 platform, the new chips that have seemed to come out.
Yeah, I mean, it was that's been out for 9 months now, I think. But it's a solid part, and I think last year for my my company that I work for, that's my regular job, I built a X399 platform with a Threadripper 1900, I think, or a 1950. I can't remember which. I think it was a 1950, and that thing went together really easy. Everything was really compatible. It was stinking fast, and I put 128 gigs of memory in that. I mean, it's just
wow.
it's loaded. I was originally expected out for 64, and my boss was like, if you can do 128, let's we can squeeze that into budget. And so
I guess the prices compared to Intel make it possible.
Yeah, I mean, back then it was still a little bit more expensive than what it is now, but we got it on. I think it had dropped down to $899 or $849 for a special that they had out, and yeah, I built that thing and got it rolled into production, and the statisticians have been abusing it tremendously, and we got in a grad student who is really into GPU stuff, and so we got was kind of funny. We got the Empire version of the
The
Titan
Titan,
XP.
yeah.
Yeah, and so people were giving us some strange looks that we ordered that, and purchasing was a little concerned. But that was the only MSRP Titan XP that you could find. There were GTX 1080s that were similar in price and obviously not nearly as good in performance. So we grabbed one of those, and so we've got a lightsaber themed video card in our statistics production machine.
Weirdly, that was the GPU bit is the only bit I think we don't get shafted on this end of the pond. Because
no, it seems like prices are a little bit more stable for you there. Or?
Yeah, well, I had quite the opposite with CPUs though, because I'm on a 7820X, the 8-core 29XX or whatever that thing. X299. Sorry,
yeah,
it's late.
It is late for you.
But anyway, I bought the 8-core version, and that was only because when I was looking at it, it was in dollars, probably $70 more than the i7 version of the regular.
Oh wow, that's inexpensive.
Yeah, plus the regular version had like a 2-week wait period, and this was next day delivery. It's like this doesn't make any sense. So I'd rather have some extra cores. I mean, again, this runs at 4.8 gigahertz all day long, and seems fine. I mean, other than that 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, my cooler died. But
you got an all-in-one, or is it?
Yeah, an AO. Weirdly though, it never got too hot. Besides the points that the pump failed. So I think it wasn't an overheating thing on the Intel's part, although these chips run toasty, I must say.
Yeah.
I mean, as I'm looking at, weirdly, the package is always way warmer than the cores are, even on this chip.
Huh.
I mean, I'm looking now, the cores are about 40, the package 44.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't understand why, but that's probably the horrible Tim that's in there.
It could be.
But yeah, I mean, I had a few questions. I take it
at
some point you have to get dinner because it's
getting too closer to dinner time, but you got some time here.
So I was wondering, especially if you compare nowadays AMD to Intel, amongst other things, the IPC, for anybody that doesn't know, instructions per clock, does that still have any? Is that sort of still dependent on Windows or Linux, or is it? It's
yes and no. I think that there are differences between operating systems and how close they kind of get to the metal and allow, some more direct control versus, Windows is trying to, work for everybody in as many hardware combinations as possible. I think that. When you compile something for a system specifically, you were probably likely to get more performances. Oddly enough, I saw somebody posted some 7-zip comparisons in between Windows 10 and then several different Linux distros, and there was one in particular that was head and shoulders above the rest. I can't remember, of course, which one, but I think that. Performance overall, I mean, the user experience, operating systems are going to have a tremendous effect on that. But if you're just simply looking at the throughput numbers, then, in theory, if you can really just get close to the metal there and spit out some numbers, it's not going to make much of a difference. But, software is everything. And if you've got poorly optimized code, then it doesn't matter what you're running on. It's going to run like crap.
Well, the reason I sort of this piqued my interest is that I've been looking at some benchmarks recently, and it seems that compared to 6-7 months ago, pre the Spectre meltdown era, that Intel had an extra 10% of where they are now, roughly, for instructions per clock. So that got me thinking, the only thing that really changed for Intel on that side seems to be mostly Windows, because there have been a bunch of patches and. Because
if you run on the latest firmware update, sometimes they do some some things in the background and at the low level to impact performance and make it more secure. But yeah, it seems like mostly it's a lot of Windows patches, and it's a it's a serious defect, but it's one that most people will never run into. But I mean, if you're running anything corporate, then
yeah. It's a mess.
Gonna do that. But unless you've got plans for the F-35 on your home machine, you don't want to you don't want to screw around with that, obviously. But
yeah, so, okay, interesting, because I personally was thinking, like, if like sort of AMD, because they always seem, with CPUs especially, seem to err on the safe side, and security is more built in as such.
I wouldn't say that. Maybe in this point, AMD has gotten a little lucky in certain things.
Well, they deserve
because
some luck for a change.
if you look at some of the errata and stuff that comes out when a processor is released, AMD probably has a little bit larger history of having errors that they've had to make some changes for. I mean, if you remember back with the original Phenom and the B2 versus B3 steppings, and some of I can't exactly remember what, but it was a pretty major cache issue that in an instance with the B2, you would just lock up everything, and they had to disable something, and you took a performance hit, and it wasn't until the B3 stepping came out that they kind of fixed that. But yeah, AMD is, any GPU, CPU, ASIC like that, it's going to have errata, and sometimes those errata can result in security issues. So it's not that AMD is any more careful. I think Intel is just as careful, if not more so. But they really got bit by this one, Intel did, and this kind of came out of nowhere. And they have great performance, and maybe part of the really great performance in IPC was that they opened up the kind of caching structure that they have, and allows you to read cache lines that you're not supposed to.
Okay, I guess that makes a bit more sense, because I sort of always understood it like the security was sort of more built in, but that's then, I guess, not really that way. Because it did seem for a while that sort of Intel was throwing AMD under the bus a bit.
Yeah. And it's all the amount of engineering talent and the amount of simulations you can go through, and the amount of people kind of thinking out of the box and like, well, how could I possibly abuse this, or how could this be abused? And AMD just doesn't have the workforce that Intel does. So it's just a matter of man hours and money that they're willing to throw at any design. And AMD seemed to have gotten lucky with Spectre and Meltdown versus how they implement that kind of forward-reading cache structure. That, of course, I can't remember any of the terms because my mind is mush anymore since I turned 46. So, yeah.
Well, be glad it's done and not like me tonight. Good thing I can watch it back and take it all in again. Maybe this is sort of asked and answered, but I have a hard time understanding why Intel, specifically with overclocking, is able to get such a much higher clock frequency on regular cooling, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because with liquid nitrogen you can go crazy anyway. So I was wondering, is it like literally the material in the chip, or is it the design, or where can you sort of, I don't know, look for that?
It's all kinds of places. If you kind of look at like TSMC with their 16 nanometer, it seemed to have clocked a little bit higher than what GlobalFoundries and Samsung did with their 14 nanometer. And usually you would think that's quite the opposite. But in fact, their TSMC 16 nanometer was based off 20 nanometer. And so some of the dimensions were much larger than what Samsung and GlobalFoundries had. And so it was in many ways an older process, but with FinFETs added. And you can kind of look and see what Intel did at 22 nanometers and how high you could clock those processors versus what we're seeing with the first generation of like 14 nanometer stuff from Intel. I mean, it took a significant drop in overclocking capabilities, if I remember correctly. And
yeah, the
you know, and
back
22
now.
had a drop from their 32 nanometer process. I mean, we had guys running 5.2 on that generation of stuff, and then they could only achieve like 4.8 on 22 nanometer, and in the first generation of 14 it was 4.6 4.7 max. And so there's materials aspects with process technology in that your VR curve just maxes out far sooner than you would think, just because you've got so many transistors packed in there, and you've got things like wire delay that hasn't improved dramatically over the past 5 or 6 years. And in fact, you could maybe argue with the smaller geometries that it's been impacted a bit. So when you take a lot of things into account, Intel is still kind of struggling. They're 14 nanometer plus and plus plus and maybe plus plus plus. I think we're going to see some improvements in clock speed performance with that, but we're not going to see any improvements with density on those parts. So AMD is they've got a good design, and it's a nice balanced design in that they were able to balance out kind of IPC and clock speed. But once you pass about 4.2 gigahertz, you're just kind of done on all core overclocking on these AMD parts. And part of that is design. Part of it is the process that they're using. The 12 nanometer process improved their position some, but again, it didn't do a whole lot for the sizes. I mean, it is slightly smaller, but not tremendously so. But it is a higher performing process than the standard 14 nanometer. I mean, the transistors switching speed is improved, and power consumption is decreased for those improvements. So, it's a nice little kind of tick-tock for them in that they have an improved product. Not only has they optimized kind of the design a little bit over the past year from when they, released the original Zen and now this Zen Plus or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's voodoo, it's alchemy, it's all kinds of things thrown in there, and they have some things under control and other things that they have no idea why it happens. It's just that they kind of try to pick a sweet spot and go for it, and they could design something that could go 4.8 gigahertz, but it's you're starting to deal with issues with the process technology and wire delay and all this other stuff that just heat. yeah it's the current 2000 series Ryzen still pull quite a bit of power as compared to like the i7 6700 I just did some testing against. It was 70 more watts. I mean, it was a significant amount. Yeah, I mean, it was a as good IPC and superior multi-threaded performance, but it was still, at the wall, you were sucking in 70 more watts than the comparable Intel machine.
Yeah, close your room off for 2.5 hours and you'll notice that.
Yeah.
And then you have obviously the heat affecting the heat, etc. And it's not good.
Yeah, the hotter it gets, the hotter it gets. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, is there actually sort of like then do we suspect with the not the Zen Plus as what we have now, but the new AMD architecture, is that sort of gonna fix a bunch of that, or is it more a bigger continuation of? So is it sort of, I don't know how to put it, like if you see like a retro car new sort of idea?
Yeah. I think it's going to be, I think they're going to have another IPC jump, and it's going to be fairly significant. And I think that they're probably working on some of the latencies in between core-to-core interactions. And I wouldn't doubt that the Freedom Fabric is getting a real good 1 over, 2 over, 3 over, or whatever. But there are a lot of improvements that they can achieve through that, not just the core. I mean, if you can get the cores talking to each other faster, lower the latency in between, the CPU, addressing main memory, which goes through the the Infinity Fabric or Freedom Fabric?
Infinity. I think.
That's right. Because it was originally Freedom Fabric when they bought C Micro, and then they've apparently integrated some of those aspects in the Infinity Fabric. But I mean, the design is of any Ryzen is interesting. The way they did the CCXs, they have the fabric, and just the ability to mix and match dies on a single package, as we've seen with the original Threadripper and then the new Threadripper, which has up to 4 dies. I mean, they probably should have called it the Epic Workstation processor rather than the Threadripper. But it's the flexibility is there, but through any kind of compromise, you're going to pay for it somewhere. And the core-to-core talk is certainly an area where they take a hit as compared to Intel, which is a little bit more monolithic and got everybody connected to a ring bus, and now the new stuff has the kind of Intel network architecture. I can't remember the name of it, of course, because I can't remember anything. I mean, Intel has some advantages there, but AMD certainly has a core count advantage, and their cores at any process node, I mean, are smaller per millimeter square, and so they've got some advantages over Intel as well. I mean, they're making cheap, fast chips. Well, maybe I shouldn't say cheap, but inexpensive.
Cheaper,
I mean, you can get
compared.
2700X for $299, and it's
wonderful.
That's 8-core 16 threads running at a max of 4.3 gigahertz, 4.4 that boosts up to. So it's a great product.
You can do just about anything with that, really.
Yeah.
I mean, and I must say, they're roughly, let's say, for IPC about 10% off. So if they're going to make another significant jump, that's got to be scary for Intel at the moment. Yeah, I think Intel is certainly sweating because they haven't been in this position for a long, long time. Now, I mean, we kind of compare and contrast. I mean, when the Athlon 64 was released, it was a better processor, period. It even though it ran at 2.2 gigahertz versus Intel's 3.2 gigahertz at the top speed at the time, it was faster, pulled less power, and it was on a larger node than what? It was 150 nanometer versus Intel's 130, I believe. Big, yeah.
And so it was a big deal. And AMD had they integrated a bunch of technologies without inflating the die size tremendously, and they were still able to use an older process node and still beat up Intel. Intel did all kinds of tricks to make sure that AMD didn't get as much market share as they potentially could have. But at that time, AMD, tricks that cost $1.2 billion at one time that Intel had to write a check to AMD. They kind of got off cheap with that one, but it was money well needed at that time. But I mean, they did some great things with Athlon 64, but AMD was still production constrained at that time, and every good die that they were able to make, they were able to sell. But I mean, they had 2 working fabs at the time, and they were going to close down the Austin fab as well, and they were trying to get the Malta foundries up and running, and it was just there's a lot going on at any one time. And so when they eventually hit the 130 and 90 nanometer, no, I think it introduced at 130, and then with 90 and then 65, and that's when we got into the Phenom land. But yeah, AMD had a heck of a design, and it had Intel reeling. But I don't count Intel out very often, and I don't think that they're out. But AMD does have a serious window of opportunity to not only get mobile and desktop market share, but they can grow significantly the not executive, but the enterprise area. And so that's high margins. That's pretty important stuff. Once a company decides to buy, you know, like an EPYC series of processors for their data needs, I mean that they're going to have to supply that for many years to come, just to, you know, make sure that the not the architecture, but the platform stays, you know,
current and the
available.
Drivers are there. And
well, yeah, and so I mean, if you've got, you know, somebody's got, you know, 10,000 racks using your processor, and inevitably some are going to die, and they have a lifespan of 5 years that they've budgeted for those products, you've got to be able to replace parts in there, and so that's you know, it's money for them. It's things that they leverage to keep things afloat and keep relevant. But so far they've done really well on their TikTok AMD with since they released Zen. But it's only been, you know, one cycle. They had the introduction, and now we've got the 2000 series Ryzen. But in between there, I mean, we had several other releases, and plus the you know, the Vega stuff and the Ryzen and Vega combination, and you know, later now we've had the new Threadrippers, and going on, I think, you know, we probably will see some more mobile stuff. I don't know for sure, but
yeah, for the first time in almost a decade, the future looks bright for AMD.
Yeah, and I mean,
at least with possibility.
Yeah, they're not bleeding money like they were. I mean, a year ago they had slightly over $1 billion in revenue and some 170 million in losses. And this quarter is what, 1.72 billion in revenue and some 117 million in profit. So this was it's for year on year. That's you would hope to see that kind of growth, and you know, they look to continue that. I think unfortunately the downside to AMD and really them focusing on their CPU, which I think if you've got limited resources, you try to focus on what's going to make you the most money, and the CPU market is by far larger than the GPU market. The GPU market is getting bigger, but it's not the money maker that potentially a CPU, you know, a good solid nicely priced CPU can do for a company. And so I think AMD really focused a lot of their R&D efforts and a lot of their money on the CPU portion, and the GPU guys were just fighting for scraps. And so we've had you know, two versions of the Polaris come out with the RX 400 and RX 500 series. We've only had the Vega out for about a year, and you know, I'd probably get yelled at, but it was a little underwhelming.
I agree.
Of course, every time I
say
that, somebody comes on and says, "Well, if you undervolt it and you do this and that, and it's just as good as Nvidia's," and blah blah blah. It's like, sure, if that's the case, then why doesn't AMD ship them like that way? And it just it's you know, it's.
But you can do the same with Nvidia if you wanted to, and then the gap is even bigger. So, yeah. I mean, I totally agree. Plus, I mean, with a CPU, for like if you're a miner, you only need one, and you use what, 4, 5, 6 graphics cards.
You can.
Unfortunately, so, people do for us gamers. So.
Yeah, but I mean, still, if you look at the amount of products out there sold, miners are still a pretty small portion. I mean, OEMs are probably the largest, that they, you know, the Dells and the HPs and whatever in the world, they buy the significant amounts of product, and then, you know, retail shelves are one of the lowest levels. And unfortunately, when guys like you and me who build their own stuff, that's what we end up buying. And if it's not available because of OEMs and direct sourcing to miners who are paying a good chunk of change for that, then yeah, we're the ones who get hurt.
It's unfortunate, but such is life. In that sense, I'm glad though that so many of them went with AMD, because I mean, they must be happy with that.
Yeah, it really buoyed their bottom line in the graphics part. I mean, we can kind of see in this last quarter with the drop off of the mining purchases that they did take a hit in the CPU GPU numbers, but it wasn't extreme, wasn't as big as a lot of people were fearing. And what that has done is if you think about it, AMD probably didn't profit a huge amount on the mining stuff because they have deals with their board partners who will eventually sell that stuff off. Is like, we will sell you chips at this amount per chip, and you order tens of thousands of these chips, and even though you're selling through a lot of that, we still have an agreement that we're selling you at this price. And so the partners were making more money because they were charging the retailers more, and the retailers on themselves were adding another 20-30% or whatever to their margins, and we're making a killing. So now that demand has gone down and prices have gone down, I think AMD has felt a little bit of the hurt, because they've kept their production pretty steady, and they didn't flood the market, especially at the end when kind of Nvidia apparently did.
Yeah, I read that story. That was almost somewhat embarrassing.
Yeah, they've got apparently a little bit of inventory that they need to take care of. But AMD is kept pretty steady, and so it was maybe it was more of a foundational product for them, and that it just kept things going at a nice rate, and they were able to control it, and the demand was still good, and so their throughput was good, and their inventory internally was low, and and when things started tailing off, then they could probably more adequately control their inventory, rather than just saying, TSMC just dropped off 100,000 chips, and there's there's no way we can sell all these. And
it's old stuff by now.
Yeah.
Is it maybe, in my line of thinking, also part of what AMD's problem is somewhat self-inflicted, in that it's a sort of, or it has become a sort of David versus two Goliaths, because like Nvidia and Intel are kind of Goliaths in their own right, and AMD is like the small company that takes both of them on.
Yes, that's a good way of looking at it. They've got two very, very aggressive competitors there. I mean, Jensen Huang is an interesting guy, and from what I understand, he expects a lot of all of his employees, and if you don't kind of hit some benchmarks there, you're probably looking at another job. And Intel is the same way. I mean, if they have those yearly employee reviews, and if you don't kind of knock things out of the park after about 5 years, you're maybe looking at another job, because eventually they're going to cut somebody. It's just the way Intel and its culture works. So yeah, they're fighting on two fronts, and so far the CPU front's going pretty well, and they're growing it, and they're shrinking it on the GPU front, and we're not going to see Navi stuff until next year. And that's kind of scary, especially because Nvidia is going to have a good 6 months of lead from what we kind of know about, have heard about, than what AMD is able to produce. So they're going to hit not the end of back to school, and definitely the holiday for Nvidia, and that's going to be good money,
especially with the GTX 2080 coming.
Or whatever they're calling it. I don't know if it's going to be an 1180 or 2080.
Well, in the ads, like you had the 2000 and what was it? The 20 from the 2018 and something from the date that scrolled up secondly.
Huh.
So that's, if that isn't a hint. I didn't see
that one. So is that for the Gamescom thing? That's
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was the date of that, and the last two things to turn were like the 20 and the 18. But with regards to Intel, like as they seem to have run into a wall. I mean, I'm almost feeling like with a culture like that, where you literally have the top level guys, I almost feel it's hard to believe that it's only down to like mismanagement. Because when I read like news about Intel and why they haven't sort of gotten any better as of late, everybody like points to the manager that had a relationship with somebody, and that.
I think it's like anything. I mean, Intel is huge and it's complex, and I think that eventually, they got in a group of people in management that perhaps was not, the best at what they do. And I'm not just talking like the big guys, Brian.
Mid-level and
yeah, I think it's probably a little bit more the mid-level and some of the product design stuff. And I think also another part of it is that the manufacturing group just got nailed with physics. I mean, from everything that they had kind of seen happening with the materials they're working with, and the testing that they had done, it looked like their version of 10 nanometer was going to be the way to go, and they were going to have a significant increase in density over 14 nanometer. They're going to have a better transistor performance and power characteristics across the board from whatever the competitors were going to have when they were initially aiming for a 2015 release.
Yeah.
And of course now it's 2018. It's still nowhere in sight. It's going to be 2019 before it gets here. And so that has allowed the competition to really step up. And so TSMC's 7 nanometer, I think, is going to be very comparable in geometries and overall performance to Intel's new 10 nanometer, which is a revised, kind of loosened up, changing around some of the materials. I don't know if they're going to stay with cobalt at the bottom 2 metal layers or just, copper throughout. We'll have to see. I mean, a lot of that information has not been released by Intel, and we won't hear about it until a lot closer to the release of actual products. But they've squandered their 18 to 24 month lead in process technology.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they just thought that they could plow through these issues, or if you kind of fix one issue, but unfortunately that led to 2 others. Just because when you're dealing with these small geometries and how you deposit metal on these substrates,
it's almost not even microscopic anymore. It's too small for that.
Yeah, it boggles the mind that any of these things even work. I think Alan said, we've tricked stones into doing math for us, and that's essentially
that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
I mean, before this, I was reading up, and when they tell you that sometimes they have 1 to 2 atom space between certain wires and whatnot, it's like
we're not there yet. Now, I mean, if people say, 7 nanometer is only about 34 atoms thick. Well, yeah, that's theoretically true, but when you're actually dealing with these process technologies, it's far more atoms than that in between these structures, and so we're not quite at that whole, there's 12 atoms in between, the gates and the pitches, and it's just, ludicrous. We're not there yet. It's still a little bit more coarse than what than the number, actually accounts for.
As a sort of follow-up on that, I mean, I sometimes hear, especially on your podcast on PCPer, that everybody sort of measures differently. And that drives me insane.
It's marketing terms now for process nodes. Up until about 90 to 65 nanometers, things kind of made sense there. And but even then, they were kind of stretching things. And I mean, originally it used to describe, some of the smallest distances or smallest pitches in between structures, and if I got that right, I think so, but who knows? Somebody will correct me if not. But once they start getting around 32, 28, 22, 20, 14, it just is. It's all been thrown out the window, and it's a product name. It's not anything representative of what you really see in the chip, because, like I said, the 12 nanometer process from Global Foundries is essentially identical to 14 nanometers, but it's more optimized. The 16 nanometer process from TSMC had a lot more in common with the metal layers than with the 20 nanometer than it did with Global Foundries or Samsung's 14 nanometer. So, it's all So I don't, how would you even just begin to describe it? Because it's
Yeah, it's
it's
nigh on
complex.
impossible anyway.
Yeah, so it's just marketing terms now. Oh, we've got a 5 nanometer process. Well, that'd be comparable to maybe Intel's first 10 nanometer that they tried out and just didn't work out well. So we'll see.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's just as a unit of measurement. I mean, it just seems silly that it's marketing.
Yeah.
I mean, a foot is no longer a foot, basically. I mean, yeah, it's a bit silly. For part of the manufacturing, I was wondering if you had like any, because I have a hard time figuring out how dependent are like TSMC, Intel, and those guys on other manufacturers of let's say machines to build chips.
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that
absolutely.
where any of the like the slowdown is recently, or is it still more the design side of things?
I think it's more. Well, it's they use a lot of the same tools for different process nodes, but they've made adjustments, especially in lithography, how they do deposition, how they do etching. I mean, how a lot of these machines are all. I mean, they're all using the same machines and tools from the same guys. So you're going to see identical. I think it used to be ASML. Used to do a lot of the optic stuff, and so everybody had those. I can't remember who's doing now the EUV stuff. It used to be two groups. Now one group, Zygo, I think, kind of dropped out of that. And so, everybody's got these same EUV machines from one manufacturer because they cost billions of dollars to make. And it's yeah. I guess somebody was saying it's 5 megawatt is what one EUV machine can take. It's some.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm somewhat amazed it's that much.
Yeah, I mean it's and all that powers is like 150 watt laser. It's just ludicrous. You have
to have a small power plant nearby just to operate.
Pretty much. It's running a fab is a very expensive endeavor in terms of power and water. Water is a really big thing that they go through a lot. And you've got to have a lot of clean water available to you that they are able to recycle some, but you've got to have a source nearby that can handle your needs, and your needs are significant.
Yeah, you have to dump the heat somewhere.
Well, yeah, it's all washing and how they do the etching and all the. I mean, it's just water usage everywhere. So.
Wow, I'm actually somewhat amazed by that's yeah. Wow, 5 megawatts for
I
basically
think so.
light.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you will need to recheck that and double check, but I think that was the number that was bandied about, and that's like 2 wind turbines worth of electricity at full speed. So.
I'm in a sense somewhat amazed that, especially for people like Intel with their margins and whatnot, that they don't have a department that designs those tools themselves. I mean, I get that you don't necessarily want to do that because there's a lot more to recoup, but I would almost think like, I don't know, I look at sort of like if you look at a sort of car manufacturing perspective, like it's, especially if you do that much volume, it's almost better to control everything, I guess, but maybe not in CPUs. So maybe it's
well, I mean, if you kind of think of it, there are certain areas where having a third party develop that stuff is better for you and the entire industry because they're selling to the entire industry. They're getting money from all your other competitors as well to help develop these advanced products, and you get to get in on these advanced products without spending that money yourself. And so optics and a lot of the tools, I mean, that's these third-party companies that provide those, and you take those tools and you develop a process out of it through, the different ways to control it all and how you implement, sorry about the phone,
that's right.
Litho and how you do patterning, and I can't reach the damn thing. It's probably my sister-in-law. I don't know anybody from Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Jerry Spence calling me. I don't know. But
it's probably one of those. I mean, midterms are coming up, aren't they?
yeah, but I mean that's why so many other previous companies that had fabs of their own have now gone fabless, because the money they spend as a percentage of their buys goes into R&D for the company that's doing all that. And so you've got Texas Instruments, you got AMD, you got Qualcomm, you got Apple, you've got all these other guys that are throwing money at TSMC, Global Foundries, SMC. No, SMC was bought up by Charter. No, anyway. But UMC is another one. And so it makes more sense for somebody else to share those costs to develop advanced process nodes, and then you have to rely on better design on your part to have a better part. And it's right now Intel is able to sell enough product that they can justify having their own fabs, and the market kind of demands that Intel have that, because Intel's the only person who can supply as many parts as really the market needs for the CPUs. So, I mean, if Intel decided to go fabless and then, try to do everything through TSMC, well, TSMC has something like 8 fabs, and 2 of them are cutting edge. And
it's
how
not
much can they actually produce? I mean, it's not only that, but I mean, the rest of the world is going to be pretty pissed off because AMD won't be able to produce anything, Apple won't be able to produce anything, Nvidia won't be able to do anything. Yeah. And so they're not going to go fabless anytime soon. And I don't know if... I mean, it's going to be at least 10 years of them running their own fabs. I don't think it'll be anything before that if they decide to go fabless. But again, it depends on how much market share they get, what new areas they go into, and how much they've been able to hold on to in terms of market share in just their primary CPU universe. But, we've got Raja on there, and he wants to get graphics going, and Jim Keller's doing SoC development, and you've kind of got these rock stars, and then you got Murthy Rajan, I cannot pronounce his last name. He's kind of one of the big wigs at Intel, and he's an incredibly smart and motivated man. And it's just thousands and thousands of employees who are top of their class type individuals, and take a lot of pride in working in Intel, and they do a very good job. So I don't see them going fabless anytime soon.
No, I must say, when Raja Kaduri left AMD, that did start to worry me a bit for their sort of GPU side. I mean, I think Dr. Lisa Su's a bit of a god on the CPU side as to what she pulled off. But
well,
another player in the game is good for us, but not so great for AMD.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she did much in terms of design, but she is an engineer who has a good background in business as well. And so she's able to kind of in her mind be able to take all these different factors in a large complex company, and she's been able to whittle down the workforce, whittle down their overhead, and made it a tremendously lean machine by still having a relatively competitive product through those lean years, and then was able to invest very strategically in getting this Zen architecture off the ground and getting the right people in to do this. And so, I don't think she's had anything to do much in terms of the actual design, but, her business acumen is very, very good, and it's backed up by a solid engineering background. So it's not just like somebody coming in and says, cut this, and cut that.
She
it's
understands
we don't need
does.
to. It's like, I don't care. I don't care the engineering behind it. It needs to be gone. She's able to look at this and say, okay, here are things that we can do. Here are things that we can combine. And streamline, and she has the engineering background to understand the processes involved and the hours it takes to design something, and so it's it's a good combination, and she's done that very, very well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, she stopped the bleeding fairly quickly still.
Yeah, I mean, Rory Reid did a lot to stop the bleeding as well, and he kind of got out of the way, which I think that he was a little uncomfortable in the position, because you needed to have really a strong engineering background to be able to effectively pull off what they've done. So it was good that he stepped aside and went on to other things, and he kind of recovered from the previous guy, Dirk. Can't remember his last name. Who was a great engineer, a good person, but made the mistake on betting it all on Bulldozer, and oh boy, and Hector before him.
Yeah.
Buying ATI, getting rid of the fabs, and doing things in a way that was just not great.
Yeah, that bulldozer's still hot.
Yeah.
For the wrong reasons, though. I was wondering, maybe this is a silly question, but how do like Intel and AMD look at each other? Like, do they sort of... is there... In nowadays anyway, is there sort of an ability to sort of slightly copy design elements from one another, or is it so patented down that it's going to be an instant lawsuit almost?
Yeah, no, it's all pretty patented down. I mean, we can go back to 2003, 2004, and see that, Intel had a CPU and a cache system that it didn't necessarily need a really fast memory subsystem. But AMD saw that, hey, if we integrated memory on our chip, had good amount of cache, we're able to implement a 64-bit processor. They threw a bunch of things all at once with the Athlon 64, and it came out great. But the Core 2 still had a separate chipset Northbridge that was the memory controller, and it had a GTL plus bus in between the CPU and the Northbridge. And it wasn't until, some of the later Core, when they originally did the Core i7, Nehalem, that they integrated, a memory controller. And so Intel makes really good designs. And Intel has, it's kind of like, have you ever heard of like HP Labs?
Yeah.
Where they do some really, really interesting R&D work that probably a lot of it never goes into a product, but they store that away. They, build up other things. They utilize older stuff that, never maybe was productized and put aspects of that into something new, and it does perfectly well. I mean, that's kind of what Intel does, I think, with their CPU design, is they've got, algorithms and, structures that they've researched and can do different things that from what, is currently available. And they kind of put those to the side. And, when they're defining a new architecture, sometimes they go in there and pick a couple of things out, and, they're able to keep this, IPC lead and just have a really solid product. And so while they're behind the ball when it comes to manufacturing, their designs are still very, very good. And they're competitive and a little faster in many ways than what AMD has with Zen and their latest iteration with the 12-nanometer products.
Yeah, that's actually why in the end I still went with Intel, because AMD was very enticing, but it was sort of like the 8 versus 8 core on specifically this was almost not competing anymore.
Yeah.
But it's just very much, I hope for the days they're going to solder their... IHS is back again, because this is not good.
No.
It's so toasty. But I don't know. Should I be afraid of delidding it? I mean, I've never delidded a CPU. I've seen people do it, but that's one of the few things that sort of makes me cringe a bit still.
Boy, it's almost a religion when it comes to the heat compound. I mean, solder will get you a couple of degrees, but it's not. I don't personally. I don't find the risk enticing. Well, the risk for me is more than I think I would actually gain, especially in my usage. I mean, I don't do a significant amount of overclocking on my home machines. I just do that for testing. But you can take away my enthusiast card, I guess. But yeah, I just find that kind of counterproductive to my needs.
Yeah. Well, I don't need it any more than it is now, but it's, to me, more sort of a money hesitation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't really want to spend this again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like this is a 3 to 4 year machine at least.
Yes.
That's always how I look at PCs, because I mean,
unless you had a bulldozer part, and then then it was 6 years old then before you needed to upgrade.
I mean, I still have a 2600K machine over there, and it still runs at 4.8 gigahertz, and it has been for like since I got it, which is like what, 6 years ago by now.
Yeah, been ages.
Yeah, I haven't even had to adjust the voltages. I mean, it was just that. I mean, for video editing and something like that, there's no comparison anymore. But then again, it's 6 years old,
and it's still run pretty. It's probably run any game you want it.
Oh yeah, perfectly.
Speeds. Yeah.
I was wondering, maybe a sort of odd question, but with the differences in IPC, does it have any effect on like PCIe lane throughput? Because I mean,
well, I mean, it's all data, and so in theory, throughput is not going to be changed. But a lot of PCIe requests, I believe, go through or require some kind of memory component. And so if you have a better memory controller that's lower latency and better throughput, then your real world experience is going to be better, even though PCIe lanes will only run at 150 megabit per channel.
Yeah.
I can't remember, of course, brain mush. But the theoretical throughput is always there, but you're always waiting for data actually to be pushed through there. And so maybe what I'm saying is, if you've got a better CPU and a better memory subsystem, you will have better utilization of the PCIe bus.
Yeah, I mean, people throw around bottlenecking so often, when it doesn't warrant it. But I was just thinking, basically, if the pipe or the hose is the same and the graphics card on the other end is the same, then the only thing that can slow it down must be the CPU/memory.
Yeah. Yep.
But I mean, I'm glad it's nowhere near bulldozer anymore. And I'm actually thinking if AMD keeps going up, my next PC will be AMD, obviously.
We'll
got to show them some love.
Yeah, let's see what Zen 2 comes next spring. Early summer maybe. We'll see.
I kind of want to. My next bigger one is to build a what you call it, a HCCP, or for video and whatnot. But if AMD finally gets it to a point where it's nice and quiet and not toasty at all, but also I think still the the 1600X or 1600 is still a lot of power for something you hook up to your TV.
Yeah, but I think the 2400G is a nice combination of performance and power. It's a 65 watt TDP product, and it's got the Vega core in there, and it's one CCX and 8 threads. That's a pretty nice all-in-one for not a whole lot of power budget.
Yeah. I had a question about CCXs. Is that sort of in part done because that way you can sort of use more dies, as in it's easier so you can more or less use the whole yield of stuff, especially the way they combine it, 4 on one side and 2 on the other sometimes? Or is it slightly more complicated than they sort of stitch it together?
Yeah, I don't... I don't know what their original decision was. I think my gut feeling here is it was a time to market thing, in that, hey, let's design this CCX. It's going to be 4 cores. It's going to have this amount of memory, and then we're going to be able to attach it to another CCX. But we don't want to make these CCXs too big because it becomes too complex. And again, you might say, we may not yield as well, and we can't cut them down as easy for certain SKUs that we're aiming at, because this one die needs to do many things. It's going to go into a 4-core 4-thread. It's going to be 4-core 8-thread. It's going to be 6-core. 6-thread, 12-thread, and on like that. And so
too many options.
They needed to have a little bit more granular control. And again, designing one smaller CCX and then being able to replicate that is a whole lot easier than designing one much larger CCX with, you know, double the cores and double the memory and all the other issues that can come. So, you know, I think it was another compromise that, you know, we need to get this out to market. We need to have it be flexible. We can't put the kind of engineering into it that Intel does to, you know, make it a little bit more monolithic and efficient. But at the same time, you know, we're going to have to integrate the AE Infinity Fabric. That's going to cost power and die. And so, you know, it's a lot of compromises. And I think that, you know, just the 4-core CCX is kind of the end result of that. And, you know, it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, with regards to the slightly bigger chips, would then for the future the most gains be sort of made in better IPC or in faster Infinity Fabric? Because I mean, it's a sort of interplay as I see it between the two. Yeah. Like, I'm not first of all, half the charts go over my head because I'm not that deep into it yet. Mm-hmm. But the way it sort of feels to me, but it's partially a gut feeling. Part of the IPC is not just cores, but the interplay between the cores they have and the Infinity Fabric, and therefore the memory.
Yeah, I mean, I think IPC solves a lot of things. I think that being able to get your throughput and improve upon that is going to give you larger gains across the board, rather than just say, hey, let's improve Infinity Fabric, or, you know, let's make sure that memory runs at 3200 speed all the time, and Infinity Fabric does. And, you know, that solves a lot of problems itself, but you're giving up a lot of power for that, obviously. And yeah, because if you ever test out a AMD, you know, Ryzen 2000 series, and you run it at kind of stock memory frequency, either 2400 or 2666, when you take that up to 3200, you do get a pretty significant boost in power consumption. I think that's the majority of what I saw with my testing.
But also
yeah, I think they're going to
focus up like crazy, don't they?
They do. I mean, it comes at a price, but it's I think for home users, it's a good price to pay. But yeah, I think that their focus is going to be initially on IPC with the next generation, because that solves a lot of problems. I mean, because so many workloads are 1, 2, 3 threads at most. That you're going to see, you know, a majority of gains in those kind of things. And then you can go through and adjust your memory controller and try to make your Infinity Fabric, you know, more efficient. And we'll see. Only have about 9 months.
Well, that's short in PC land, really.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as you buy it, you always feel it's old already, because the next thing is around the corner.
Sure is.
I mean, the only time that didn't happen is because AMD wasn't on the ball with the GPUs, and I bought my 1080 Ti, and I was like, I bought it, and I, for like 2 weeks I felt like, oh my god, now they're gonna drop it, obviously, and they still haven't. So far I'm happy.
yeah, it was like back in the day with the what was it, the GTX 680. The old 8800 GTX.
Yeah.
If you bought one of those, you had a top-of-the-line graphics card that, I mean, the price didn't drop dramatically at all over, like, the next 2 years until they released something better.
Sorry, the coffee machine is switching off and my camera doesn't focus anymore.
It's quite all right. Okay, about one more question, then I got to get out of here.
I have something non-CPU related, but it's...
Sure.
So with regards to burgers, bloody as hell, medium, or well done?
I like them medium. I don't like them bloody, just because the amount of E. coli poisonings around the U.S. have you know, been something that you pay attention to. So yeah, I get them a nice medium. Otherwise, in my youth, I would always get them like rare, medium, rare. I didn't mind the bloody mess nearly as much as now that I'm older and my immune system would maybe not handle it as well. I get a medium.
I mean, I had a total of 3 burger questions lined up, actually.
Oh, well, you go ahead and knock them off.
Is cheese required for a burger to be a good burger?
Not necessarily. I've had perfectly fine burgers without them, and one in particular that I never get cheese on anyway because it would just kind of add to the jumble of flavors that. So yeah, no, you don't need to have cheese to have a great burger.
Okay, well, good. Because I sometimes feel like I'm the only one because I hardly ever take cheese on a burger.
I used to never take cheese. And when I order a Whopper, they always ask, "Do you want cheese on that?" It's like, "Oh hell no." That's they use crappy American cheese. All it does is give you that extra salty flavor, and it's just I can't even explain the mouthfeel. I hate American cheese.
I agree. I have the same when I'm there. Like, actually, Whoppers are so much better on this side. It's insane.
Really?
Yeah, like I don't like Whoppers in America. I love them here. I don't know what it is. The bun seems to be better. The meat seems to be better. The lettuce seems to be fresher. Same goes for KFC. Last time I had KFC in America as a test, because, I mean, you do that. I mean, I'm usually there for like a month and I have it once. But it's like, oh, this is grease. And here it's nice.
This is good to hear. I'll have to keep that in mind next time I visit Europe.
And my last burger question was, what's the difference between a good burger and a great burger?
Oh, geez. You can't overcook the burger. If you do, then that makes things even, if the rest of the thing is good. Depending on what style, I mean, it is nice to have crisp lettuce. Tomatoes. Most tomatoes around here just taste like cardboard. If you get fresh, summer grown, out of your backyard tomatoes and cut those up, it makes a huge difference. But mainly it's just, it's the time that you spend to make the burger. The place I go to all the time, they're artists there, honestly. They present it nicely. They cook everything exactly like it's supposed to. They toast the buns. They don't over toast things. They don't slap it together. I mean, if you go to McDonald's, you're lucky your burger's in a stack. Maybe you got cheese off to one side and some of the mayo or the secret sauce, and it's not covering the entire bun. It's just, just take your time and do it right.
I saw a comment that says the pickle makes it great. I must say, I agree. I love pickles on burgers.
Yeah.
No, totally agree. I love those pictures, by the way.
Thank you.
Those burgers they always look fantastic. And I usually see them like late at night. I'm instantly hungry and it's very bad because I usually start eating.
Well, I'm sorry I've kind of abused you that way.
That's all right. Anywho, Josh, thanks very much for your time. If anybody wants to find you, they can, let's pull it up, go to PCPer.com. I have to pull up the right one. Or PC Perspective right here on YouTube. You have the merch store, joshtech.com. And they can always find you on the Twitter at Josh D. Walrath.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for your time. And I've enjoyed it a lot, I should say.
No, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for coming. And who knows, see you hopefully soon at some point. And otherwise, I'll see you in your own podcast.
I don't know. I haven't talked this much in a long time. My throat's getting a little parched. I don't have any beer, so I'm out of luck.
Yeah, I'm used to it. If we go short, it's usually 2 hours.
Yeah. All righty.
Thank you very much, and see everybody in the next one. Bye, chat.
How many people were in chat?